Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban, and welcome to episode 280 of the podcast. It's May 3rd, 2017. A returning guest today is John Dyer, president of his consulting firm, JD&A Inc., and a contributor to IndustryWeek.com. As we discussed back in episode 229, John started his career at GE, later moved to Ingersoll Rand, where he had a number of roles. He had the good fortune to learn directly from W. Edwards Deming, as he was able to participate in and later assist Dr. Deming in his famed four-day seminar that included the red bead experiment. So today our focus is on that red bead experiment. We'll talk about it. John will share memories of Dr. Deming facilitating this. We'll both share and discuss our reflections and our experiences with this and the lessons learned. Tomorrow, by the way, I am facilitating the experiment as part of my Better Metrics workshop that I'm leading in Seattle through the good folks at Catalysis. I'm also doing this workshop in June before the Lean Healthcare Transformation Summit that they sponsor with the Lean Enterprise Institute. You can still sign up for that workshop if you're attending the summit. And of course, I'd love to come to your organization to do the workshop to help you with your approach to managing metrics, people, and improvement. If you're not familiar with the Red Bead experiment, you can go to leanblog.org/280, see links, including some video of Dr. Deming facilitating this famed exercise. So I hope you enjoy the discussion as much as I did. And again, to find links to John, his website, his articles, and such, go to leanblog.org/280. We are again joined here on the podcast by John Dyer. John, thanks for coming back with us here.
I'm glad to be here, Mark.
So we talked to you back in episode 229, but for any of the listeners who haven't heard that episode yet, can you kind of give a quick synopsis about who you are, a little bit about your background and what you do?
Okay. I've been in the continuous improvement field for most of my career. It spans a little over 30 years now. I started with General Electric. I was with GE for 10. During that time, I had one of those kind of dream jobs where for a couple of years they asked me to go around and collect best practices. This was in the very early days of Lean and Six Sigma. I had the opportunity during that time to visit a lot of great companies, a lot of divisions within GE as well. I also spent some time with Dr. Deming back when he was still teaching, and I've got a very fond set of memories from my time with Dr. Deming during those days. Anyway, like I said, I was with GE for 10 years, then Ingersoll Rand, the maker of products like Bobcat front-end loaders at that time, Schlage locks, air compressors, club car, golf cars, a pretty wide variety of products. And I headed up there a team of folks that was asked to drive Lean and Six Sigma throughout the corporation on a global basis. Worked for them for 10 years as well, and then I've been out on my own for a little over 11 years now, working with a wide variety of great companies and organizations that are wanting to implement Lean and Six Sigma.
And I think we're going to take a deeper dive. In the last episode, you talked about getting to meet Dr. Deming, getting to work with him when you were at GE. But looking ahead, here today, very contemporary times. You and I have both facilitated Deming's what's called the "quote unquote" red bead experiment or the red bead game. But I'll defer to you. You worked with Dr. Deming himself. You've done more of this. Maybe I'll throw the ball in your court to explain this exercise and a little bit about how it's facilitated. If you can sort of describe that in a nutshell, or a little bit more than a nutshell, I guess.
Well, yeah, I actually got a chance to see Dr. Deming do the red bead experiment twice. and in person. And the second time, I took very thorough notes because I was fascinated by the words Dr. Deming used. I realized the second time through that every word he used had a purpose to set up this experiment. And again, I just found that very fascinating. And since then, I've done the experiment myself many times with lots of different organizations. So right up front, I will apologize for one thing. Having done this now for many years, I have incorporated a few of my own twists and turns in the experiment. So if I get something a little bit wrong from what Dr. Deming did, I'll apologize up front about that. But like I said, I do have very thorough notes, and I have tried to use his words as much as I can. To start off, and again, all these things were very purposeful. To start off, he basically told the audience that they were now all unemployed. And he put up on the screen on an overhead projector a series of one ads. And the first one ad was for 6 willing workers, and he put on there minimal education required. Now think about this, right? Why would he use those exact words?
Yeah. What do you think was behind willing workers? And yeah, you're right. He did use that very specific phrase.
Yeah, and again, my opinion is that he knew that in the audience there were a lot of CEOs and COOs and executives, company executives that had come to see him. And I think he wanted to make it clear to all of them right up front that these were their employees. I mean, these were the equivalent of the employees that come to work every day in their organizations, their factories, what have you, that that most of these workers, 99+%, come to work every day wanting to do a good job.
Yeah.
And I think he planted that seed right up front that these are willing workers, people who want to come and work and do a good job. Now, and on the minimal education required, I think that was more to set the minds at ease of the volunteers. I think that he wanted to make it clear up front that they weren't going to come up on the stage in front of hundreds of people and have to do some sort of complicated statistical analysis.
Right.
So I think that was more, but he did play upon that. During the actual experiment, he did kind of, joke around quite a bit about, now, wait a minute, don't you understand what gravity is? And again, playing upon the fact that, hey, minimal education required means that you got to at least know what gravity is. So that was the first thing he did, get 6 volunteers. And then he asked for 2 quality inspectors and a quality supervisor, if you will. Now, again, why did he want 2 inspectors? Once you start to go through Dr. Deming's 14 points of management, you start to realize that many of these points play out in the red bead experiment, and this is one of them, right? The point about ceasing inspection to improve quality. I've got the points here. It's number 3, cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. Eliminate the need for inspection on a mass basis by building quality into the product in the first place. So again, the gist of the experiment for those who haven't seen it, and you can go on YouTube and see it for yourself, or
and you can see it actually, or there's clips of Dr. Deming himself facilitating it.
Right, exactly. And so you can get the feel for how the experiment goes. But basically, you have 6 willing workers. They're going to sample 50 beads from a bowl that's mixed of white and red beads, and then they take it to the quality inspection department and have the two inspectors count the number of red beads, which represents defects. Now, again, why did he use two inspectors? Because he knew, and this has happened 90+% of the times I've done it as well, he knew that the inspectors at some point in the activity were going to disagree with each other.
Right.
Which, again, just shows how flawed inspection is. And when they did disagree with each other, it was kind of like, wait a minute, you're just counting red beads. How obvious can these defects be, and yet you both can't agree on the number of defects? What does that say about inspection?
Yeah.
So now, all right, once he got the two inspectors in place with their supervisor, he then turned to the 6 willing workers. And again, I found this really fascinating. He asked the 6, which one of you 6 believes that you're average? And, of course, the 6 willing workers kind of all look at each other like, well, what does he mean by average? But eventually someone will raise their hand, and he brought that person to the front of the line. And then he explained to the rest of them, now, wait a minute. All right, let's just call this first person Phil. He would say, all right, now the rest of you, the other 5, that means that you're either better than Phil or worse than Phil, since Phil considers himself average. Now, again, it's kind of funny. It's like, okay, why did he do that? And, again, my opinion, I think that he did that in order to have the first person, the one he's going to demonstrate this whole process to be somewhat, humble, if you will. I don't, because usually you got to think when you get 6 volunteers, you're going to have 1 or 2 really high-strung, CEO types that are going to be in the mix that are going to want to jump in and do it first.
Yeah.
And I think he wanted to make sure the first person that went had a sense of humbleness about them that say, yeah, okay, I'm kind of average. And that way it starts the experiment off on the right foot.
Yeah.
With someone who's not going to go overboard on doing the actual, experiment.
Yeah.
So once he got the average person identified, he brought that person up to the workstation. He had, basically 2 containers, one full of red and white beads and the other one empty. And then he went through a very specific set of steps to make these beads. Now, again, this is very important because I have seen some people try to do the red bead experiment and skip a lot of these steps. In fact, there's even a bead box that you can buy where you basically just shake the box and turn it over, and it randomly samples 50 beads. And that's great for doing statistical analysis kinds of training.
Right.
But it's not good for the red bead experiment because you miss out on all of these steps. And
right. Well, there's nuance and there's different, there's sources of variation in terms of how you hold the paddle, the angle of the paddle, which direction you dip it in. There's all sorts of different ways a person could do the job in this sort of classic design of it, right?
Right, exactly. But keep in mind, really none of those things impact the end results.
Right, right, right.
Yeah,
but it seems like it would somehow.
Yeah, exactly. The willing workers are sitting there going, well, wait a minute. Okay, I better follow all these steps because I want to do a good job.
Yeah.
Now, in their mind, they know it really doesn't have any impact, but in their heart, they really are trying to do a good job, and they think, well, maybe if I follow all these steps, I might get lucky, or maybe there is some impact, and there really isn't. So Dr. Deming tells the willing worker, okay, the first thing you do is you pick up the larger container with the beads in it. You got to hold it on the side. You tip it so the beads come out of the corner. And that's where he talks about letting gravity, move the beads.
Yeah.
And you understand gravity,
and
right?
He says gravity is cheap.
Right. And it's got to be 8 centimeters above the other container, and again, like, wait a minute, 8 centimeters. So again, he's throwing in these metrics that, again, have really no impact to the process, but it sounds good.
Yeah.
It sounds, whoa, okay, 8 centimeters, I better do it. And then the plane has to be, perpendicular to the container you're pouring the beads into, and then you pour the beads back into using the same procedure. And then it's like I wrote these down. He says, okay, and then you take the paddle and you put the paddle in on the broad side, put it into the beads, not on the beads, but into the beads, agitate the paddle, and then do nothing. And then he repeated, do nothing. Then pull out the paddle at a 44-degree angle, so, using the horizontal axis, and then carry the paddle to inspector number 1. And then I love this, is then when he does it himself, right, he's showing the first person that, how to do it. And, of course, you're going to get some red beads. I mean, it's just, very, very difficult not to.
Yeah.
And he tells the workers, I purposely made some red beads so you can see what they look like.
Yeah, just to show you.
Yeah, just to show you. And then, so now, okay, think about this. Back to why he was so adamant about following all these steps. Again, he's establishing a standardized, well thought out, methodical process. But it's the wrong process when you think about the overall system, right?
Right.
So the system is broken because of the beads mixture. It has nothing to do with the workers.
Right. Well, so one modification, I've tried to modernize the presentation of this, very particular, if not fussy, standardized best practice way of getting the beads, where I've created a TWI, training within industry, job instruction with key points and reasons why, and it might look like the type of document people are using today in the context of lean. And I think it speaks to, as you've been saying, the lesson learned that having all of the super detailed level standardized work in the world won't make up for a badly or wrongly designed system.
Right. That's exactly right. And think about it, right? In a typical system, you might have, 100 processes that are part of that system. All it takes is for one of those processes to have flaws, and the entire system is going to have flaws.
Yeah.
Right? So here, in this case, right, you have all these willing workers. They're very competent people. You have your quality inspectors. They're competent people. You have all these methodologies set in place to make sure that the samples are done correctly. Yet in this case, the flaw is that the red beads are mixed in with the white that came from supposedly a supplier or somewhere in the supply chain. And that one flaw is causing the system to fail no matter how hard the workers try. Yeah. So that, I think that's one of the key learnings. And in fact, I wrote this down. Let me find it real quick. From one of the willing workers, basically, one of the willing workers said, I tried very hard, hoping that I would do a good job. I tried to follow the methodology as best as I could, hoping that I would do a good job. And like I said, but my mind told me that this was impossible.
Yeah.
Yet I still tried because I didn't want to let Dr. Deming down. And that led to tremendous frustration.
Yeah.
And think about all the workers out there that would say the same thing, right,
Yeah.
about their job. They're trying to do a good job, trying to follow the methodology. They don't want to let their company down. They don't want to let their team down if they're on a team. Yet there's a flaw in the system that they really have no control over, and it's causing tremendous frustration and morale issues.
Yeah. Well, and just to further paint the picture about some of the mechanics, with you're dipping that paddle in, you're drawing out 50 beads. 20% of the beads in the container are red. So on average, you would expect not each person, but on average, you would get 10 red beads. That is designed into the system. And I pulled up a picture from the last time I ran this, and you look at some of the variation from person to person in the first round. You had the first person got 6 red beads, the second person got 4, the third person got 15, the fourth person got 14, and then we got the last 2 people got 9 and 10. So there's also sort of an inherent level of variation in the system, which I think is really interesting for people to see, that on average in that first round, they got 58 red beads. That was slightly below the expected average, but yet you've got all this variation that, as you were saying, John, really doesn't have anything to do with the worker. But it's interesting to see how this starts to play out.
Well, and in fact, again, some of my notes here, Dr. Deming, of course, he's trying to, in a very tongue-in-cheek way, trying to get the workers to think all along that it is their fault, right? Again, trying to paint this picture that, again, talking directly to the executives in the audience, that, hey, you keep blaming your employees when in fact they really don't have any impact. So like as an example, when the first person went up in the time that I did it, they only got 4, which was really a good result, right? Like you said, the average is going to be somewhere around, could be as high as 15 or 20, depending on the mix of the beads. So 4 was great, but he said, wait, what happened? He said, I said there cannot be any red beads. And then he yells out, halt the line, stop production, we have defects. And he said, he turned to the first worker. He said, what happened? He said, and the worker said, well, I tried to do my best. And he said, well, variation, I thought this was an interesting quote. He said, variation is uncalled for. He said, we're using a very rigid procedure, so how could there be variation? Again, back to the system that, hey, yeah, they are using a very rigid procedure, but the variation has nothing to do with the procedure. It has to do with the supply. So anyway, he, like you said, and you laid it out very well there, the first day, you have a good mix, and then what Dr. Deming did is basically, and the way I put this to folks is think about like rolling 2 dice, right? If you roll 2 dice, the average is 7, but the range can be anywhere from 2 to 12, even though 2 is very rare and 12 is rare, but the average is 7. Well, to your example, the average is going to be somewhere around, what did you say on yours?
Well, in that first round, they got 58, so it was slightly below 10 per person. But you're right, it depends on how the beads happen to be mixed. They're not going to always be uniformly distributed within that container.
Right. So if you were to put this on some sort of a control chart or even a histogram, you start to realize that, like in your case, the average is 10. Probably the low end of the extreme is 1 or 2, and the high end of the extreme can be, 18 or 19.
Yeah.
But so think about it, right? In the first day, there's always going to be someone, well, not always, but most likely someone well below average and someone else that's well above average. So he turned to the one that was well below average and said, basically made a real big deal of it. So the guy who got 4, right? He's like, oh, this is one of our best employees. They deserve all kinds of praise. And in fact, let's make him employee of the day. And we're going to give him a nice bonus in his paycheck. And then he turned to one, and that first day, someone got 13. And he turned to that person and said, okay, clearly you don't care. You don't care about your job. And in fact, you're now on probation. And if you do not improve, we're going to have to let you go. Again, starting to introduce fear, which again is one of his 14 points, right? In fact, I think it's one of his favorite points was drive out fear, point number 8, so that everyone may work effectively for the company. Well, he started purposely introducing fear. And now think about it, right? When someone gets on the low end of the curve, the next time they do it, there's a high probability they're going to get something much higher. And someone who is high end of the curve, the next time they do it, there's a very high probability they're going to get something lower, right? So
they're going to regress to the mean. So what happened the last time I ran it, the employee of the day, Michael, who had gotten 4 in the first round, significantly better than average, he got 12 on day 2. And the person I put on probation, the person who had 15, her performance improved a little bit to 11.
Right. So, but still, that's significant. So what Dr. Deming did in that case, right, is he said, okay, what does this teach me if I don't really understand, the whole concept of variability and histograms and control charts? Well, if I just look at the raw data and I'm a manager, not a leader, then what this would conclude is that the person who got 4 I praised and they got worse. So clearly praise does not have much of an impact.
Well, and even today people laugh about that when they think of, like, did people behave like that in the year 2017? Say, oh, well, he slacked off because we praised him, which is not the right conclusion.
And then the person that got the high number and was put on probation got better. So clearly, fear works. So, basically driving home the fact that, hey, I now need to start putting fear into everybody. And maybe that'll make them perform better. But again, the workers had no impact.
Right.
And he knew that, so he was just, this was all tongue-in-cheek to try to make these points. So the second day, he put in a goal, right? And again, this addresses, I think, one of his 14 points that's the most controversial. Mm-hmm. Every time I share these 14 with a group of executives, this is the one they have the most heartburn with, which is basically abolishing the whole idea of management by objective. And again, Dr. Deming was talking about how, hey, if you set an arbitrary goal, then that's going to drive behavior towards that goal, when in fact maybe you could do significantly better than that goal. Or maybe that's going to drive you to do stupid things. Yeah.
People distort the system, or they cut corners, or they cheat. We see that here in the year 2016 or the year 2017, like last year, with the Wells Fargo scandal. Those employees were given outrageously unrealistic goals for the number of accounts per customer, and a couple thousand people were fired for cheating that system when they were trying to, it was a matter of survival, and executives got big bonuses because people distorted the system and made things look good. Now there's finally some repercussions to some of those Wells Fargo executives, but I've seen this in workplaces where I've been, and yeah, I mean, you set the unrealistic target, and Dr. Deming, or people like Brian Joyner or Don Wheeler always make the same point. Three things can happen. People can distort the numbers, they can distort the system, or they can improve the system. And those two distortion options are usually easier and more within people's control than actually improving the system. So of course that cheating happens.
Right. Yeah. In one of my classes, I always ask, let's assume that you're in charge of a fabrication department, and I was your boss and came to you and I said that you had to cut your scrap by half by tomorrow or you're fired. Could you do it? And it's funny how many hands go up, and the type of answers they come up with pretty quickly usually are things like, well, I just wouldn't record the scrap anymore.
Right.
Or
Hide
I
the
just
scrap.
stop production. I'm just not going to make anything tomorrow, and then I won't have any scrap.
When I worked at GM, people, this is going back 1995, people in the plant under all this pressure, they literally hid scrap. And so it was as if it didn't exist until it got reported out financially. So you could stack it up someplace in the far corner of the factory and people would pretend it didn't exist.
Right. Well, when I was at GE, making refrigerators, production output was the number one goal.
Mm-hmm.
And we would routinely put refrigerators into boxes without doors and put them onto trucks just so that we could get credit for shipping them.
Yeah.
And then take them off the trucks and unbox them and put the doors back on overtime the next month.
Yeah.
Just so that we could hit that production number.
Yeah.
It's very real for sure.
The other side of that, you're saying if you set a goal, that becomes a limit. I heard somebody tell a story recently about an organization that set a goal, something like every employee should have 2 improvement ideas that they implement each year. So that 2 became a limit, and employees were purposely holding back. And I've heard of that before, that people hold them back until the next time period because they're afraid they won't come up with any. But the thing that killed me, this version of the story, is that people were actually selling ideas for cups of coffee or lunch, or it was almost like some TV prison show scene where these ideas had a street value and they were traded and swapped. And but it's understandable. I mean, it's
right. Yeah, it's amazing how human behavior is very constant, and every action has a reaction, and you've got to understand what those reactions are going to be. So you're right. Setting a goal is a limiting factor, when in fact, instead, and again, Dr. Deming talked a lot about the difference between managing and leading. A leader would say, hey, let's try to implement as many ideas as we can and work together as a team, and with the understanding that this is going to help us meet our customers' needs and give better job security for everyone as we meet those needs, instead of playing games. So anyway, that just to continue on this real quick, so he set a goal of in his case, he set the goal as 3, but his average, I think, was a little higher than yours, because nobody came, except for the 1-4, that nobody really even came close to 3. And then, he started asking, well, wait a minute, why aren't people hitting the goal? And he even said, management is deeply concerned with these figures. Management wants a complete report on what happened. So again, say performance is horrible. Management will close the place down if we do not improve. Enjoy your work day because this might be your last day. So that was the second day, gave him a goal of 3. On the third day, and I love this one, this was probably one of Dr. Deming's greatest pet peeves. of his 14 points, this is the one that probably gets the least amount of attention, but he talked about this quite a bit, and he emphasized this on the next day. He basically said, okay, clearly we're not even coming close to the objective, the 3. So management has gotten together, and we have decided to help the workers out. And now, of course, the willing workers are now thinking, oh, good, they're going to let us sort the beads, or they're going to let us do something to help out here. And then all of a sudden he put up on the overhead screen, we've decided to go out and purchase, $100,000 worth of quality posters and put them up all over the factory. And I even have them written down here. He says, we bought these posters at great expense. And one was, do it right the first time. Another one was be a quality worker. Another one, take pride in your work. So again, all of these are implying, the posters are implying that it's all the workers' fault.
Yeah.
If they just tried a little harder, the system would improve. But the system's flaw has nothing to do with the workers. And again, this gets back to his point number 10, which is eliminate slogans, and instead, or targets for the workforce asking for 0 defects, instead institute leadership.
Yeah.
And again, whenever I work with a group of executives and ask them to rate these 14 points on how relevant they are, that one usually gets the least amount of relevance.
Yeah.
Because they don't really understand what's the meaning behind that.
Yeah.
Hey, stop blaming the workers when it's the system that's broken.
Right. Yeah. So when I run this, I throw up on screen some different posters, and they're images of honest to goodness posters that you could go buy on the internet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they're not ironic joke posters. I mean, these are real posters that an organization sells. And one of them, maybe I'll put a picture in the blog post. It says, "Quality begins with you." And there's a slogan that says, "Think quality." And there's a man in a hat with a mustache pointing. And I mean, it looks like a Joseph Stalin or somebody really terrifying. And I don't understand who. Well, people do buy them, right?
Right. Oh yeah. Oh, they wouldn't be in business, right?
Yeah.
I know, it's frightening. Well, anyway, and then to kind of finish it out, so he's gone through 3 days, and then what Dr. Deming does, and this is where I have a little bit different spin, like you were talking about before. But on Dr. Deming's last day, what he does is he basically takes the 3 best performing workers and fires the other 3, or just tells them to leave, takes the 3 best and have them do it twice. And so again, emphasizing the fact that, hey, you know what, we're going to take our best performing workers and have them do it. And of course the results are the same. And he, of course, gets very disappointed, right? In fact, I've got here, worst day ever. He says, what happened? Our best workers couldn't do it. Worst day with the best workers. Plant must close down.
Yeah.
And we'll keep your name on file.
Yeah.
Now, what I do is a little bit different. Again, it's all about that 8 point about driving out fear. I basically, instead of picking the best workers, I basically tell all the workers that, if you do not get 0 defects, you're fired.
Yeah.
And
so then they all end up fired.
Yeah. So of course, and again, they can't. They have no control over how many defects, but they're trying. They'll try to pick out the white ones and place them on the paddle with "I'm not looking," or they'll try to get 2 or 3 samples. But of course, they can't get zero, or it's very rare to get zero. So they start getting fired, but the data comes out accurate.
Yeah.
After doing that a few times, I changed it up slightly. I said, okay, in this time, if any worker goes above zero, everyone is fired, including the quality department and the inspectors.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because by putting that one change in, and then I'll purposely kind of turn my back to the whole thing.
And it's predictable what happens. Yeah.
Right. All of a sudden, the data comes up zeros all the way down the column. And I'll turn back around and I'll look at that and I'll say, wow.
Yeah.
Look how much better we've gotten.
Yeah.
This was amazing. So clearly we can do it. Clearly we can hit zero every time. Of course, everybody's laughing because they know what happened. Yeah. But it really emphasizes this whole point about if you don't drive out fear, then it's going to cause people to do really stupid, bad stuff, including fudging the numbers.
Yeah.
And again, at that point, there is no hope for making improvement happen.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it goes to show. I mean, think of situations in the real world. These willing workers had no interest in cheating. They were doing their best, and when people get put under extreme pressure, I mentioned Wells Fargo. If you look what happened with the VA waiting time scandals, people are either threatened with. Managers are getting threatened either with losing their job or not getting promoted or not getting bonuses. That leads to all sorts of cheating. Look what happens in school districts with teachers and sometimes principals conspiring to cheat in different ways, help the students cheat on standardized testing, or in some cases actually going and erasing and changing answers after the fact. That's not what anybody would naturally deviously scheme to do. It's a reaction to pressure being put on them by the system and that fear that you mentioned, that fear that Dr. Deming talked about.
Right, absolutely. And I've seen it myself. It's just amazing how that will drive good people, good, willing workers to do really dumb things or bad things just in the name of trying to hit a target or trying to keep their job or and actually it's interesting because we talk a lot, and I know you talk about this quite a bit as well, the importance of teams when doing improvement, right?
Yeah.
The one thing about teams though that you have to be careful about is that it will also drive a bit of this mentality because people don't want to let the team down. Right? I mean, if it's my job, well, that's my own fault. But if I make the team look bad, now all of a sudden it's all of my peers and friends that I've got a connection to because I'm part of this team, and we're all in trouble. So sometimes people that are really heavily connected to a team can also do kind of dumb things to make the team look better than it really is.
Yeah.
So that's something to kind of watch out for. Got to be careful about that.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a great exercise. A great again, keep in mind he called it the Red Bead experiment because this was all kind of a psychological exercise, if you will, to drive home these really deep points about how, again, ones we've talked about, right? Don't blame the workers. Instead, look at the system. Emphasizing several of the 14 points throughout the activity. The effect that setting an arbitrary goal has on the morale of the workers. The real meaning behind those posters, what fear can do to the organization or to the system. I mean, there's some very deep meanings behind everything that he did as part of this experiment. And like I said, I've now done this myself many, many times, and a lot of eyes get open, especially in the management ranks.
Well, and that's really who the experiment is designed for, to try to influence senior executives, right?
That's exactly right. And in fact, actually, it is designed for the managers, but the workers that also participate in this, it's kind of a bit of you can see a bit of a relief, right? It's kind of like, I've been trying to tell people that it's not my fault. I've been trying to tell people that it's the system. The system is broken. Management has given me bad tools, bad material to work with, bad machines, and yet they're trying to tell me I've got to meet these quotas, meet these objectives, and it's not my fault. And it's kind of like, it's like this relief. Wow, I've been trying to tell them this all this time, and finally someone gets it.
Yeah, and there's a difference between a dumb poster or a person saying oh, quality is your responsibility. Quality starts with you. Quality is everybody's responsibility. Where Dr. Deming said quality starts in the boardroom.
Right. Exactly. Starts with the company's leaders. Understanding why this is so important. Think about it, and this is what I love about Dr. Deming. He was a statistician, a professor in statistics, and you would think he would be one of the last people to really emphasize the role that culture and leadership and understanding human behavior would have on the system. But look at the impact that he had in Japan. It was so deep that, again, any plant, or I shouldn't say any, but many of the plants that I have visited in Japan, it's amazing how they have incorporated every one of these 14 points and live it every day.
Yep.
Even what is it? Almost 25 years after his passing.
Right.
It's pretty incredible to think that one person had such a profound impact on an entire country.
Well, and that these lessons and the scenarios could still be so relevant today, whether it was 1987 or 2017. I think, as you commented, I think one thing that's there's a lot of things fascinating about Dr. Deming, but, he often gets labeled as a statistician because that was his degree. But, Dr. Deming said the most important aspect for a manager is understanding psychology and understanding people and understanding employees as individuals, which, it sounds more like social sciences than math. You mentioned earlier, and I think we'll maybe wrap up in a couple of minutes. You had mentioned control charts, and control chart, and you can use this exercise to learn how to do a control chart and to see common cause variation. But it sounds like from what you're saying that the greatest lessons from the Red Bead experiment are not about the math and the numbers, but more about people, the psychology, the leadership, right?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and that's how I use it as well. Is when I do the Red Bead experiment, we go through all of what Dr. Deming went through, and then what we'll do is we'll take all that data and that was collected and put it onto a control chart, and all of a sudden you start to see that like you said, the average is 10 with a lower control limit of 2 and an upper control limit of 18. And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, okay, when you tell the worker they have to get 0, basically that would indicate that a special cause based on the chart. Which means that they had to have cheated somehow, some way, because that's outside of the norm most of the time. Now, I will tell you, you'll get a kick out of this. In all the times I've done it, one time, we got 0. And it was actually when I was demonstrating it to the willing workers at the beginning. I put the paddle in, pulled out the paddle, not a single red bead. And of course, everybody was like, "Whoa!"
I would be really shocked.
Yeah, well, I was too, but I'd done it enough up to that point to know that was very unusual.
Yeah.
So I played it. I went along with it and said, "Well, see, this is how you do it."
Yeah.
And everybody, from that point on, everybody, there's got to be a trick. There's got to be something.
They think you're a magician.
Right. I just got super, super lucky. That 0.01% chance, and it actually played out. And so it is possible, but highly improbable.
I think the lowest I've seen is 2, and this is the last time playing it. I've done that one variation of setting a goal of 3 and then offering an incentive of $20 and leaving that open for a couple of rounds, and I've never had to pay off the $20. Or when I was in Brussels, it was a €20 note. But when I was in Brussels, somebody actually got 2 in the second round before I offered the incentive. And so when I offered the incentive, that guy said, well, hey, I already did that. Do I get the 20? And I said, well, no, you proved it was possible. Now the incentive is to get others or to get you to repeat your performance. And of course, nobody did.
Right.
Nobody did. Yeah, and looking at the results, nobody did better than 6 after I offered the incentive.
That would come very close to saying, hey, I'll give you $20 if you roll a 1 on 2 dice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very, very improbable.
Yeah.
But again, like you said, the other real key to all of this is how we look at data, understanding how variation works, understanding, the impact that data can have on decision making, correctly or incorrectly. So one last thing, and if you don't mind, I'll
go ahead.
Quick plug of I do also write articles for Industry Week. I've been writing now for 3.5 years. So I do have one coming up that will hopefully be out in the next couple of weeks. That is all about the role that variability plays in understanding capacity. Capacity in both product and service, and how that can have a huge positive impact if you can figure out how to reduce that variability in your capacity to produce, which basically is almost like getting free product other than the material cost.
Yeah.
You're already paying for the labor, you're already paying for the overhead. So any additional capacity you can squeeze out of a system, and assuming you can sell it, that product or service has tremendous margins.
Yeah.
So again, it kind of ties right in with understanding how the data works, how variability works, and how that relates to the output of a particular system.
Yeah.
If somebody would like to learn more about that, they can go to the industryweek.com website at some point in the next couple of weeks and find my article. So.
Yeah, and it's certainly okay you mentioned that, because I was just about to ask you to give a plug for your columns, your articles. What are some other ways people can find you online if they'd like to contact you for different things?
There are a lot of John Dyers out there, so if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's John Dyer PI, all one word, PI for process improvement.
Not private, not for private investigator. Oh, you
right.
I stepped on your joke. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. But yeah. So John Dyer PI. If you'd like to see some of my articles at Industry Week, you can go to industryweek.com/author/John-Dyer, Dyer, and there's a web page there where you can pull up the articles I've written for Industry Week.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff there. I will link to those articles. Again, if this is your first time hearing a discussion with John here, go back to episode 229 to hear more of John's reflections on Dr. Deming, Six Sigma, his time at GE, and beyond. You can find that by going to leanblog.org/229. You can find it in the podcast feed. If you subscribe to the podcast, you can find that episode on iTunes or wherever else you find podcasts. So John Dyer, again, has been our guest today. John, a real pleasure talking to you, and really appreciate you sharing about the red bead experiment, having a conversation about sharing recollections of your time with Dr. Deming and what you're doing today. So thank you again for being our guest.
All right. Thanks, Mark, for having me.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.